In this video, we're going to take a couple minutes to just discuss the concept of state in Terraform and how that works. There won't be any actual tutorials or demos in this, but rather I just wanted to take a couple minutes to briefly walk through the docs about state, summarize some of it for you, and hopefully save you some time and clear up anything that might be a little unsure if you're just getting started. So at a high level, state is just Terraform's way of understanding the current configuration of your infrastructure. By doing so, it keeps everything in sync. It actually has some performance benefits. And also, if you're working on a team, it allows people to make sure that they don't override each other's changes, and you can do some things like locking as well. So at a high level, as it says here, the primary purpose of Terraform state is to store bindings between objects in a remote system and resource instances declared in your configuration. Really what that means is it's just Terraform's way of keeping track of what the configuration of your infrastructure is supposed to be. It's Terraform's way of keeping track and keeping itself organized. Technically, all the state files are just JSON files, and as it says here, direct editing is discouraged. Technically, you can do it, but you're really opening yourself up to throwing it out of whack and out of sync. Format, again, stored in JSON. Really, that's all you need to know. You can output it as a command if you'd like. And just to show you what this actually looks like, we can hop into Visual Studio Code and I'll show you what the state file looks like. So they're stored by default at terraform.tfstate. That's the name of the file, and it looks like this. As you can see, it's just JSON up and down, and it has each resource that you're using and some metadata and information about it. And that's it. There's also a backup file available, but ultimately it's a JSON file that you can edit if you want, but it's not recommended that you do so directly like that. Metadata, the big thing here is keeping track of dependencies. Without this, it would be really difficult to know exactly what resources are dependent or impact other ones. And if this state wasn't stored with this metadata, essentially Terraform would have to go through every single time and make sure that it has the correct order of operation. So in terms of performance, essentially it's caching this information. By keeping it in a state file, when it goes to apply these changes, it can just read that and go out and do what it needs to do and only touch what has been detected as a change. Otherwise, in order to actually understand what was new, it would have to every single time go back and resync and understand the current state of your infrastructure before making any changes. And while that's not really an issue on a small environment, when you get to these larger infrastructures, constantly querying for that information and sending those API hits back and forth becomes an issue, not only for performance, but maybe you have a limit in terms of your API hits. By keeping the state, it not only allows you to have that copy locally of the configuration, but prevents those extra back and forth calls to figure out where your infrastructure is at. And lastly is syncing. And this is big when you get into a team environment, when you have multiple people working on the same infrastructure. If you're local, you don't really need this remote state because you're the only one doing it. In our examples, we have not worked with this yet. So as it says here, remote state is recommended as a solution to this problem with a fully featured state backend, which is something you can configure. Terraform can use remote locking to make sure that two people aren't accidentally running it at the same time. In terms of remote state, the way you can do this, a common way is to put it on a cloud provider, put it in an S3 bucket, blob storage, and then in your Terraform configuration, in your actual project, you can configure what's called the backends file here and point it to exactly where you want it to be stored. And then anybody using that project will be using the same remote state. That way you don't run into overriding issues. It'll automatically lock for you and just keep everybody on the same page, which is, I think, a nice feature of Terraform. Obviously, there's a ton of documentation around this. It can be a little dry, but it's also really important in terms of understanding exactly how the core of Terraform is actually working. Everything really is revolving around state and making sure all of these resources and things that you're adding and destroying and constantly updating stay in line with your real infrastructure. It understands dependencies, performance is not an issue, and as a team, you can all work together and feel confident that you're not going to override or screw up anybody else's changes. I'll make sure to add these links in the description so that you can get directly to these documents as well. And in a future video, we'll go through that process of actually setting up that state file on the back ends and storing it in maybe an Azure blob or S3 bucket, as it was mentioned. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.